Eco Money on Money FM 89.3.
You're listening to Eco Money on Money FM 89.3 with me, Rachel Kelly. And today we're going to catch up on the latest in the solar industry here in Singapore and across Southeast Asia. And who else better to get us up to speed than Kavita Gandhi, who's the Executive Director of SIAS, and Mr. Christophe Inglin, who's the Vice Chairman of SIAS and Managing Director of Energetix, a solar company. Kavita and Christophe, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thanks, Rachel. Nice to meet you and nice to be on Money FM.
Wonderful to have you both with us. Today, we're going to be talking about renewable energy and demand and growth within the region. One of the key things when we look across Southeast Asia and ASEAN is that we see rapid growth when it comes to energy demand. Governments across the region have also rolled out targets when it comes to renewable energy, catering to that energy demand. But while we have aggressive targets across the region, I'm sure there are also roadblocks. Kavita, what are some of the challenges in rolling out renewable energy to keep up with government targets?
You're right, Rachel. I guess the demand for energy is going up and most of the countries would like it to be clean. And I think that the technology is all there now. That's not an issue. Financing also, when we talk to bankers, they say, oh, we have enough and more money available for clean energy. I think in my experience, talking to some of the regional folks and some of our member companies who work in the region is typically the policies and the permitting requirements for the region, which are a big challenge. In Singapore itself, and I'm sure Christophe would agree with me that I think policies are very well laid out, but yet still we come across small little glitches here and there. You know, safety is one issue in Singapore we are very, very passionate about. And I think Christophe has just come off a meeting with SCDF. So I'll let him elaborate on that. But from my point of view, what I see is basically it's the government will and policies.
Okay, Christophe, maybe you can add to that. You know, what are some of the challenges on the policy front that you're seeing on the day-to-day basis, even when it comes to things like safety, as Kavita mentioned, because that's critical, isn't it? If you're laying solar panels, especially up on a roof.
Up on a roof and every time you're up high on a roof, you can fall down. There's also safety concerns with the electrocution. So you're dealing with high voltage DC, which can be quite dangerous to handle. And one thing that happens in any industry when it grows very fast is you get outsiders coming in. You have to. You can't just be more and more productive. So it means newcomers come in who are less experienced and will make beginners' mistakes all over again. So we're trying to mitigate that together with the Ministry of Manpower and the Civil Defence Force, so our fire brigade or fire department, to see how to pass on the lessons that the experienced people have learned so that newcomers handle it safely.
Christophe, can you talk to us more about solar rollout in Singapore and how things are going? I remember many, many moons ago when I first started covering sustainability, I was told, and this is maybe in 2009, 2010, that, you know, solar in Singapore wouldn't work because of cloud cover. But obviously things have changed. Technology has changed dramatically.
Yeah, and you've got the dates bang on. 2009, 2010 were when the first anything meaningful scale was added to rooftops here. The cloud cover myth, indeed, that's no longer the case. It wasn't then either. The real blockage was commercial viability. And in Singapore, we never had any subsidies, unlike in other countries. That's now to our advantage because there's still no subsidy. And the problem with subsidies is they're always constrained by budgets and therefore limit growth. So you can only grow as far as a subsidy is available. Now, the great news is that, especially in Singapore, but also countries like Philippines and around the region, solar power is competitive without the need for subsidies. So you don't have budgets constraining your growth. It means it's commercially attractive. People want to invest. So we can start looking at what are the next bottlenecks, what are the next roadblocks, what are the next things to get out of the way that are impeding further growth.
And when you say the next bottlenecks, the next roadblocks, let's take a look again at the region now, because Kavita, as you mentioned earlier, financing isn't a problem. And some of the bankers that I've spoken to have said that the challenge is finding the right projects to invest in. Is that still a key issue?
Well, that's what the bankers say, right? I think in mainly when what they are referring to is, again, the policy challenges. If we look at a country like Indonesia, or even Thailand, they are actually rooftops are being curtailed from feeding into the grid, for example. We, in fact, work very closely with the association, the Solar Association in Indonesia. Under our program, the Sustainable Energy Center of Excellence, we worked on doing capacity building for the solar industry in Indonesia, along with a foundation. Most of the people who attended the session were talking about how it is very difficult to scale up solar in Indonesia because of all these strict requirements, working with PLN. And in fact, they were very keen on some of the projects where the electricity could be exported to Singapore. And that's another area that Singapore is, we as CES are very involved in. And ASEAN grid has been a talking point for many, many years, but I think it's coming closer to reality. Actually, Singapore has already done its first, or in the process of doing its first import from Laos, and also talking very actively with Indonesia about a green corridor project where electricity is going to be imported from Indonesia via subsea cables. And this is an area which we are working very actively on. And in fact, even in our conference, the Asia Clean Energy Summit that we stage every year in October, there's a whole section dedicated to connectivity. I mean, if you look at the Singapore 4 switches, one of the switch is electricity imports. So we are going to delve deeper into that and what are the challenges, in terms of importing electricity, and how can Singapore benefit, because we are going to have a huge demand for clean energy, given that we want to be net zero by 2050. And our own production can never be enough. So we have to look at other strategies. And this is one of the strategies on electricity imports. So, these are some of the key areas where, there is a demand for energy at a higher price in a place like Singapore. And not only is this energy being exported to Singapore, if we talk about Indonesia, but they are also seeing how they can do some manufacturing, how they can develop a manufacturing sector, how R&D can be helped. Some of our institutions can be working with the Indonesian institutions. So it's a whole different topic by itself that we can talk to you about in terms of connectivity. But it's a very important part of, going net zero.
When you're talking about importation, Christophe, I'd love to get your take on that. Obviously, as somebody who's within the industry, how do you see the balance of renewables in Singapore playing out? Are we on time and on target, as we like to say?
Well, that Indonesia one actually is a very good example to bring up, because it addresses several different concerns. One of them, because the growth in demand in Southeast Asia, renewables doesn't cannibalize the incumbents. But actually in Indonesia, it does, because they've got themselves into a situation where they are obliged or condemned to buy all the electricity that the coal-fired plants can produce. And therefore, even though PV is cheaper than subsidized coal, if you generate the PV, you are displacing coal and you have to pay for it anyway. So that's a dilemma for supplying PV in Indonesia. How elegant, therefore, that we can build plants in Indonesia and export to Singapore, so the Indonesians get the benefit of perhaps local manufacturing, of the business of EPC construction, and Singapore gets the benefit of the electricity imported. Because what's our constraint? We only have so much space. We're actually just a city. And the roof space and available ground space is perhaps enough to generate maybe 5% of our demand. And our demand is going to increase as well, especially if we convert fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles. So we take over some of the transportation sector under electricity. So we need more. And just like any other city, we need to import our energy and our electricity from outside the city. The wrinkle here is that outside the city also means outside the country, which gives its own special challenges and makes it very interesting.
Where would you look to, Kavita, within the region as a front runner when it comes to renewable energies? I was reading an article recently and it said Philippines is leading the pack. What are your thoughts?
Just till very recently, it was Vietnam. But all our members were like going to Vietnam, doing pretty large projects. But like as Christophe mentioned, that Vietnam is was highly subsidized. So when the budget ran out the industry has come to a little bit of a grinding halt. So Philippines is a very good in a very good country in terms of renewables because of the high cost of electricity. It's a privatized electricity market. And it is growing, but I think they have their own policy challenges still. So I'm not sure exactly what is the installed capacity, but it's not as high as Vietnam, for example. But they are showing promising signs. In fact, Philippines is always a good market when it comes to energy efficiency, when it comes to renewables, but somehow it doesn't translate to the results on the ground. And again, I think it's the policy bottlenecks that come into the picture. In fact, in terms of financing, Philippines is again a very good market for financing, both private sector, multilaterals, they're all there. But we don't see that much installed capacity or in terms of energy efficiency. So I would circle back to my initial comment about policy when it comes to Philippines. I guess Thailand has also been a good market, but again, it's a little bit slow of late. Indonesia again shows a lot of promise when it comes to rooftop, nothing, hardly, very, very little capacity. So they need to look at very groundbreaking projects like what I mentioned in terms of Green Corridor. And I was speaking to some of the people on the ground in Indonesia, and they were very excited about this project because there's a demand center in Singapore and there can be a supply center in a place like Batam or one of the Riau Islands. So it's really like a win-win for both the countries. They want to develop their solar sector, which is, they're very capable of developing the manufacturing side as well as R&D. But at the moment, there's very little solar module manufacturing that's happening. So I think that's the sort of symbiotic relationships that will work in the region if we really want to scale up the clean energy to the level that the demand requires and that countries would like to, even to meet their own domestic needs and to comply to the Paris Agreement as well.
Do you think on the policy front, we're going to see things move fast enough? Because next year is already 2025. We're 25 years away from these net zero targets. Are policymakers moving enough, or is enough being done on that front to get the ball rolling and to make it to the targets that a lot of governments have announced?
Well, I can speak for Singapore. We are the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore, and I can see that movement in Singapore happening at a very rapid rate on every front. It's a whole of government approach. All the industry sectors are being mobilized. Personally, we are also setting up a digital platform for which we have been funded by Enterprise Singapore to bring the entire ecosystem and create a digital marketplace for buyers and sellers of sustainability services. So in Singapore, definitely we see that, and there's so much push on hydrogen to pivot away from, natural gas. So I think Singapore is firing on all engines. And because, as you know, in Singapore, when the government commits to something, we really want to meet that goal. I've been in the sector for the last 20 over years, and I've never seen this kind of momentum. About the rest of the region, you definitely see the programs being set in place, the policies being explored, but I think their problems are also bigger.
I anticipate similar things happening there as has happened here. The last 2 years have been phenomenal. It takes time for the general public to accept the reality of solar being commercially attractive. The old rules of the game 5-6 years ago, people said, the payback period's too long. And that sentiment sticks in people's heads. But as you see more and more of your neighbors putting solar panels on the roof, then you think there must be something in it. You ask them, why are you doing this? They go, well, because I get a 3-year payback. It's attractive. And you believe your neighbor much more than you believe the solar salesman, obviously, because there's less bias there. And then it takes on an inertia, a momentum of its own. And I think we'll see that happening in other countries as well. It's successful. Also, because solar is inherently cheaper, it does lower the price of electricity for everybody, even non-users of solar electricity, because your average price of the generators in the mix goes down. So that's a big benefit for everybody. Then it comes to, well, we mentioned bottlenecks at the beginning. What's next? So we've got regulatory, at least the first one of the market attractiveness is there. So that's remove the bottleneck of is it worth it? And then at various stages in different countries, we've got the regulations, which are smoothing the way. We're going to bump into the problem of lack of grid interconnectivity at some point because you need more highways to carry the electricity. And we're going to need storage to overcome two problems. One is intermittency. As clouds dance in front of the sun, your output goes up and down, and that can be disruptive to the grid. So you need short-term storage to deal with that, or as one means of dealing with it, especially as your solar penetration levels go up.
We've been speaking with Kavita Gandhi, Executive Director of SIAS, and Christophe, Inglin, who's the Vice Chairman of SIAS and Managing Director of Energetix. You are listening to Money FM 89.3. I'll be back with you next week for more eco news and views.